Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Today, my guest is Victoria Leigh. Victoria will take us through her research of the Sharon Tate Labianca murders, which contains some interesting links into the Beatles and their music. And so, without further ado, here's the presentation with Victoria. Well, folks, we're back with another show, and it seems like the whole Paul is dead topic doesn't want to go away. Today, I have a very special guest. Victoria Leigh is with me, and as I have explained on a number of shows, I have a small group of people, maybe a half a dozen or so, and I look at it as almost like an open source investigation. And over time, we got to know each other by communicating via email, and occasionally I would connect with people via Skype, and we would share information. And so this small group of 5 to 6 researchers have gotten together, and we periodically share our information and our thoughts and our insights. And one of those people is Victoria, and she has brought some very, very interesting aspects of the McCartney conspiracy to the table. And so with that, Victoria, I want to welcome you to the show. And I was wondering, to get started, if you could just give the audience a little background into how did you get involved in Paul is Dead research?
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I am a little bit newer to the PID community. I've done this less than 2 years. And one night I was just kind of searching around for something to watch, and I came across the video, The Last Testament of George Harrison, which I know that's not the best one out there, but there was enough about it that piqued my interest. So I started looking at things a little bit closer, and I realized that there are at least 2 different people playing Paul McCartney. And I wandered around a little bit more. Well, I practically wore out the internet looking at YouTube videos about the McCartney experience both ways. I looked at both opinions. And eventually I hooked up on Mike's channel, and that's now where I spend the majority of my time. I don't look at a lot of other things anymore, but that's how it all started.
Well, that sounds like a very familiar story, because a lot of us got started that way. Let me ask this. Before 2 years ago, before you got into the McCartney conspiracy, were there times when you suspected it wasn't the same guy, or was McCartney just McCartney to you?
I believe Paul McCartney was Paul McCartney. I have a good friend who was a radio DJ for years and years and years, since the 60s probably. And he had moved to different markets, and he, lived through the original PID thing. And one day we were talking and he explained it to me, but it was his opinion that it was the real Paul McCartney. And so I kind of went with that and moved on. That was really the only time I'd ever even heard of it in all these years. And I really wasn't a Beatle fan, although I thought some of their tunes were catchy. I wasn't, the Beatle fan. And so this is all a little bit newer to me.
Well, let me ask this then. When you finally turned the corner and said, you know what, we have more than one guy playing this part, was it disappointing to you? Were you angry about it? Or was it just a shrug of the shoulders and it was more like, well, it is what it is. Let me just walk down this path and see what else I can find?
No, it completely woke me up. It makes me think now, every day that I get up and look at things, I thought, what was pulled over my eyes all those years on that, something that didn't really even matter to me, but was so obvious. What else isn't real?
Exactly.
What else isn't real out there? And I can't get into every conspiracy theory. Don't get me wrong. I've picked a couple of them that I look at a little bit closer, but it does make me think differently about everything.
Yeah. A lot of folks have reached out to me and said that this was their moment of awakening. For some people, it was the JFK assassination. For others, it's the moon landings. And still for others, it's 9/11. And I have received, a lot of emails from folks that said this was the turnkey moment for them to understand a little bit more, and for some folks, a lot more about how reality really works. That there's a lot of deception, there's a lot of illusion, there's a hidden hand and all that stuff. So So it is an important conspiracy in my book. As you probably know, I put a video up. It's a very short one, which says, why is the McCartney conspiracy important? And I'll put the link down below for folks who want to take a listen to that. But let's get started with your presentation. I don't want to talk your ear off, but you're going to take us through the Beatles, the Tate Labianca murders, and Rosemary's Baby. And on the surface, they may seem like three things that are disconnected, but I'm sure you're going to help us to connect the dots.
Well, another item I wanted to mention, I was born in August of 1969, so I've always been interested in the Manson murders, just to understand kind of what was going on at that time in my life. It just seemed interesting. So that was one of the reasons also that I picked this topic to look into. Starting with the Beatles, I've included a couple photos here so we get everybody in there, or maybe everybody but Street Paul. Okay. And I have included a picture of the Tate LaBianca murders here. Now, I want to say one thing about this. I did not talk about Stephen Parent in this presentation. And it's not that he's insignificant in any way. It's just all of these other people were successful or played into the stories somehow, except for Stephen Parent, who really does seem to have been at the wrong place at the wrong time. And so we have from the left Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring and Abigail Folger and Voytek Frykowski and Stephen Parent and Rosemary and Leo LaBianca. And then we also have a picture of a young Mia Farrow and Roman Polanski. And we'll learn more about Rosemary's Baby as we go through here. Okay, I thought that we should start off talking about the Dakota. It seems to be a central theme that everything ties into in some way, shape, or form. It was built in 1884, and it is located on 72nd Street in New York City. And 7 and 2 there's your 9. As we see the 9s a lot around here. The building was the setting for Rosemary's Baby, but they did not film inside the building. They wouldn't allow that. They only did exterior shots, and the floor plans were studied and copied on the set. And anybody who's seen the movie, I don't know if you really remember, there was some travel through areas where you could go through a pantry or a closet into another closet. Those apparently were real in that building. They copied that. Actually, they were originally made for servants so that they could get from one unit to another for parties and whatnot.
I have to rewatch the movie. It's been a long, long time since I've watched it.
Yeah, I wished I had had time to do that before this, but I did watch some clips, but I did not have that opportunity. So I will be doing that in the future. John Lennon was a resident of the Dakota. And he was assassinated outside of the 72nd Street entrance. And that area was filmed in the movie Rosemary's Baby. His assassin, Mark David Chapman, hours prior to the assassination, as anyone who's read up on that knows that he was out there several hours before the incident happened. He was chatting with another Beatles fan named Jude outside of the Dakota. Now, Jude was a girl. And they actually talked about going somewhere together, but Jude had a date and said that she, needed to go on her date and couldn't hang around with Mark David Chapman anymore. But I felt that was odd. Her name was Jude. One of the former residents was Rosemary Clooney, kind of a tie into the Rosemary theme there. And Lennon had once observed a UFO from the balcony of the Dakota. He talks about that in some of his interviews. I believe that, what was the name of his other girlfriend? May
Pang.
May Pang and John Lennon were the ones that saw the UFO from the balcony. And he did own several units in the building, which was unusual. Most people are only allowed to own one. And after arriving in America in 1964, they did a photo shoot in Central Park. And that captured Lennon with the Dakota in the background, which I also thought was unusual. And the only other thing I really noticed about the Dakota, and Richard had helped me out with this a little bit, was that the builder, Edward Cabot, he did die before it was complete. And I'm sure most people have heard the story that it's haunted or has some happenings there.
And Richard is Richard Balducci?
Richard Balducci.
Okay. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Richard. Richard was a big help to me, by the way. Next, we have John and Yoko in front of the Dakota. I do not know the date. I would say that was a little closer to the 1980 when he passed away. And then we have John on his first trip to America, probably the first day or two. And if you look right above his head in the distance is the Dakota.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's some coincidence, huh? Moving on to Rosemary's Baby. The release date was 6/12/1968. And for those who are looking for nines, we have 6 plus 12 being 18, which is 9 plus 9. And 1968 also reduces down to 6. The director and screenplay writer was Roman Polanski. One thing I remember about reading about Roman Polanski, this was probably his first screenplay that he wrote, and he did not know that a lot of times that they are so different from the book. And so actually the book and the movie are very much alike, which is unusual, even then. The Dakota was called the Bramford in the movie. I played around with that word. I couldn't really find anything ominous why they named it that, but I would be interested if anybody else had any ideas. The book version revealed that Rosemary's Baby had a birth date of June 25th, 1966. And June 25th is also the anti-Christmas in occult studies. That means it's exactly 6 months, or the opposite, from December 25th. June 25th, 2019 was also Global Beatles Day, which I didn't hear a lot about. Did you hear a lot about that?
No. June 25th is Global Beatles Day, so it's the anti-Christmas?
Yes, June 25th, 2019 was Global Beatles Day this year.
Yeah, but June 25th, as you mentioned before, is the anti-Christmas in occult studies.
That's right. And going back to the book, a baby born June 25th, 1966 would be 33 in the year 2000. And of course, 33 was the age when Christ died. It's also 33 is a Masonic number there.
Right.
The movie, Rosemary's Baby, stars Mia Farrow as Rosemary. And Sharon Tate is rumored to be an extra in the movie. It wasn't clear to me if she really was. But there were photographs of her on the set. Some people have photographs of her saying, oh, here she is, she was an extra, but I didn't find that to be clear. She wasn't credited, and so I'm not really sure about that. She was married to Roman Polanski at the time, so it's possible. And Anton LaVey, who was the author of the Satanic Bible, he is reported to have been a technical advisor in the movie, and he also was not credited. Rosemary's Baby book was featured in the God is Dead issue of Time magazine, the same issue that Lennon's Christianity comments were reported to the American public. I think that was April 66, maybe.
So we have the anti-Christian thread kind of going here, Vicky, the way I'm looking at this. Global Beatles Day, June 25th, which is the anti-Christmas day in occult studies. Then you have the Rosemary's Baby book was featured in the Is God Dead issue of Time magazine. I actually remember the front cover of that magazine, and that's the same issue as you have here in your bullet, that Lennon's Christianity comments were reported to the American public. So, you can call this coincidence, but as we have shown so many times with this particular conspiracy, we're running out of coincidences, in my view. These things are all planned and scripted.
Well, to throw another coincidence into the pile, I was looking for maybe a better picture of Mia Farrow than this first one where she is surprised about what her baby looks like. I found her holding this very issue of Is God Dead? And that's a snippet from the movie, which the movie was made in 1968 and the magazine was published in 1966. So no coincidence there on that one.
Yeah, and you did read the blue version of Memoirs, the 9 after 909 edition. Have you read that yet?
Yeah, I've read both of them.
Okay. So then you know that in that book, Tom has a footnote in which he explains that the Illuminati declared war on Christianity in 1962.
Right.
Right. So I think what we are seeing here is the war playing out.
That's right. That's right. I think, I mean, there were other occult type movies that even Sharon Tate herself was in, but I think that Rosemary's Baby was really the first big satanic like movie.
Yeah.
It was before The Omen, it was before The Exorcist, but this was the big mainstream movie that came out that it scared people to death. One thing, but they weren't used to seeing it was much more innocent back then. They were not used to seeing such things. Mia Farrow, she was a star, and she also showed up in India at the same time as the Beatles in 1968. While the Beatles were there with Mia, her sister was also there, whose name was Prudence, and that's where the song Dear Prudence comes from. I read different reports where she had walked past the Dakota on the same night as the Lennon assassination. I don't know that those came directly from her. They were just newspaper, magazine reports.
And you're talking about Mia Farrow and not her sister. Mia Farrow walked past.
Mia Farrow walked past the Dakota the night that John Lennon died. So that's not necessarily unusual, but apparently somebody spotted her. So when hearing of the Tate Labianca murders, she remarked to others that she would be next. So I don't know what that meant. For some reason, she thought she would be next.
Now, how did you get that quote? Was that something you read? Is that something that's documented? Because that's kind of odd.
Yeah, a lot of these I do have. When I would find something, I would copy it to my file. So it's a little bit of a mess of things. But that wasn't something that I just found once. I tried before I put things on here. There's a ton of things that I didn't put in here because maybe I only found it once or I didn't know if it was credible or whatever. But that was something that was reported on several occasions, several different sources.
Okay.
She had been married to Frank Sinatra, and she was served divorce papers on the set of Rosemary's Baby, and they did divorce. But one of the things when the Tate LaBianca murders happened, Mia kind of went into hiding. She said she would be next. Frank Sinatra went into hiding. I don't know what he has to do with any of this other than he was married to her at one time. Jay Sebring cut his hair. But he actually went into hiding. And I thought, wow, all these people are hiding. So that's kind of strange.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And there were a few others. Steve McQueen, I think, started carrying a gun, and different people reacted differently. But I thought that was strong that he would go into hiding. He's probably a person who always had security around him anyway. And, of course, some of us know that Mia used to star on Peyton Place with Barbara Parkins, and we'll come up with another Barbara connection later as we go through the slides. Next, we have Roman Polanski, who, as I said before, was the director and screenplay writer for Rosemary's Baby. He was married to Sharon Tate. They were married about a year or year and a half before her death. Some of his other films included Knife and Water and Cul-de-sac, which Knife plays into the whole thing, and so does Cul-de-sac to some extent. So I went ahead and mentioned that. But he did have a lot of movies and was considered very good at what he did. He was in Europe when this happened. He was in Europe when Sharon was murdered. Something that I did not know, but I did find this from multiple sources, at least two. Along with Sharon Tate, he dined with Robert Kennedy the night of his assassination. And also rumored to be present was John Frankenheimer, the director of The Manchurian Candidate.
Very, very strange.
Yes, I thought so too. Now, again, I did look to find that at least a couple times before I said that, but I've never seen anything not agreeing with that either. But I only found it in a couple places. It was kind of been buried. Anybody who watches Mike's channel knows what the Indigo Galleries are. That's where Yoko and John met. And wasn't it Asher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were frequent guests at the Indigo Galleries in Europe. The name of Sharon's deceased baby, which Roman, he named the baby after her death, and he named him Paul Richard Polanski after their fathers. Now, I really found conflicting information that his name, that Roman's dad's name was Richard. But that can be one of those things, or it could have been an uncle, it could have been a nickname, it could have, whatever. But I did want to mention Ringo's real name is Richard. So you have a Paul and you have a Richard Polanski. Roman told others it must have been someone who knew her regarding her murderer. He and Sharon were big on the party scene, whether it was LA or Europe or wherever it was they were living at the time. They were partiers. They were right in it with everyone else.
You mentioned before about dining with RFK the night of the assassination. And, that's very similar in a way to, John Hinckley, who shot President Reagan. The Bushes, George Bush Sr., I believe it was dining with Hinckley's father a day or two before Reagan got shot. So, or I don't know if it was maybe George Bush Sr., one of the Bushes. Maybe it was George Bush Sr. or maybe it was Neil Bush. I'm trying to remember now. It's been a long time. Had dined with Hinckley's father a day or two before the son shot Ronald Reagan. So it's kind of weird how these things kind of play out where people who really should be hanging around with certain people are with them at very peculiar times when things go down. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a little closer than the normal, 7 degrees of the rest of humanity?
Yeah.
I think that the tone here is starting to take mind control. What we'll be seeing throughout a lot of these slides is a lot of these things deal with mind control, and that does kind of set in with a lot of the things we talk about on your channel, whether it be mind control of different ways, whether it be through music or movies or commercials or the government. But there is kind of an overtone in all of this with different methods of mind control. In the next slide, we have Roman and Sharon. Sharon was a very pretty girl. I put a couple pictures up here, and I don't know. I don't know about you. I hate to be mean, but they don't really seem to match to me.
I was just going to say, I have no idea what she saw in that guy.
She could have had anybody. So I don't really understand that, but by all accounts, Sharon was very nice, very sweet, very good person. And, I don't want to say that she was necessarily naive, but maybe she was. I mean, LA and Europe both are big places. She was in a different crowd probably than she was used to being. So this first outfit she's wearing, that's a little bit Egyptian looking to me. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But the second outfit, I don't know what to think of that. I did see it in an auction last year. It was auctioned off. And so I got to see a little bit better picture of it. But this is like a black veil here.
Yes.
But they look like they're at a party. I'm not sure what that's for, but it's odd. For the rest of her wardrobe, that's odd.
It's very dark.
Yeah. She usually didn't wear a lot of black, where a lot of people do. She did not. Sharon married Roman in 1968, and she was 8.5 months pregnant at the time of her murder. Roman gave her a puppy, and that puppy's name was Prudence, going back to the Mio-Farrow connection. Her father's name was Paul James Tate, former Army intelligence officer. Anybody here read Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon?
Yep. Dave McGowan's book. There's always some military or intelligence connection to these things.
Yeah, especially when they reside in or around Laurel Canyon, or in this case it was Benedict Canyon. It's the next canyon over. I was like, wow, that's very interesting. But his name happened to be Paul James Tate.
Yeah.
Where we have James Paul McCartney. Anybody who reads up on the 60s knows that the age of Aquarius. And I'm not really clear when the age of Aquarius officially hit. I think everyone says something different, but she was an Aquarius. Not going to go deep into astrology in this, but I wondered if she were a target, if that made a difference. I don't know.
My understanding is that there are occultists that believe that the age of Aquarius officially started on December 21st of 2012. So the whole Mayan calendar thing was really about the officially bringing in, or the start of the age of Aquarius. I'll just throw that out there. We can ask Richard. Richard probably knows. Well, I'm sure Richard knows a lot better than we do, but that's my understanding.
The prelude of it started a little bit earlier in the 60s with the song.
Yes. By the Fifth Dimension.
And so I'm not really sure about all that, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. We seem to have a lot of coincidences. Maybe that's one, maybe it's nothing. I'm not really sure. Sharon was one of the 2 victims in the murders where a rope was found around her neck. And Sharon did have an interest in the occult. Now, here's where it's hard, because she really seems like the nicest person. And people have said everything from the best to the worst about Sharon Tate. It's all out there. And I didn't know what to believe. Perfect people, and she was a practicing Catholic, and I saw it all the way up to they were swingers with orgies and drugs. And now I know the drugs were there. I know that did happen, but not while she was pregnant. You know, it's hard to look at her and think that she lived that hard, honestly. And when you watch her on film and stuff, she does seem like a nice person. So I'm kind of going along with she at least was into it, like tarot cards and astrology and parlor tricks and hauntings. And, you know, she had an interest. But I don't really know. Everyone says something different about how far that goes. So I'm going to go with that, parlor tricks. I think that's safe. It's somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Ringo Starr admitted in an interview, I think that was Rolling Stone, where he did know Sharon and Roman. Sharon was a supporter of Robert Kennedy. She was Catholic. Again, they died. His last meal was with the Polanskis before he died. One of the theories floated regarding the motive for her death was that she overheard something about Sirhan and that she was not supposed to know, something about mind control. But again, that was in a book, actually, that was released some years ago. I had never heard that. Had you ever heard anything about that?
No, I hadn't heard that was the reason why she would have been taken out. Now, I do know, and obviously have researched the fact that Sirhan was a mind control subject. I believe that to be true. But whether she was killed for overhearing that I had never heard before.
Okay. At the time that this happened, the media coverage can only have been compared to the JFK assassination, is what I read. That when these murders happened, it was just all over the news all the time. So this was a big deal. But I never, there was a lot of things about all this that I never heard. So I'm not really sure. I wanted to mention, we'll come back to this part about she received 2 light blue steamer trunks the day of the murder. And most of us know her from Valley of the Dolls. That was a movie with Barbara Parkins, who, again, starred with Mia Farrow in Peyton Place. So in this movie, Sharon Tate starred with Barbara Parkins in the Valley of the Dolls, and they were friends. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I've never seen that movie.
It's one of those kind of sort of bad movies that's really good. It's kind of a cult following, but nonetheless, you'll always remember it if you see it. Okay, she also appeared in The 13 Chairs, which is also known as 12+1, The Wrecking Crew, Don't Make Waves, The Fearless Vampire Killers, and The Eye of the Devil. And so I think Richard pointed out to me that her first and her last movie had these incredibly satanic overtones, The Eye of the Devil, which actually is a very good movie if you watch it. And she did a great job in it. And then The 13 Chairs.
Very uplifting titles.
I know, but I guess when you're a struggling actress,
yeah,
I don't know. If she had an interest in the occult, she may have, where someone else may have not done that. She may have felt more comfortable doing that. I don't know. But she did do some occult movies. And Malibu Barbie is cited as being based on her Don't Make Waves character, which I believe we're going to have a picture of that coming up soon.
Who is Malibu Barbie?
That's just, Barbie does different Barbies they have.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So they made one that they never said it was after her, but most people think it was after her because it looks more like her. And then like the swimsuit is similar in the same color. I think that's a big deal when you get a Barbie doll made after you. Jay Sebring. Jay Sebring was the men's hairstylist to the stars. Jay did something a little bit different with hairstyling. He would shampoo a man's head. That wasn't done before. And I'm not saying he didn't use clippers, but he turned this into being more like a scissor thing. Whereas before it was just clippers and real cream. So he completely changed the way men's hair was cut. And a lot of the stars, famous people, had their hair done by him. He would fly to Frank Sinatra's place like once a month to cut his hair. I think a haircut was about $50, which was a lot of money back then. He was a former boyfriend to Sharon Tate, and they did remain close friends after the breakup. And when I say close friends, he was around. I mean, he's in pictures with she and Roman. He flew, when he found out that Sharon had taken up with Roman, he flew over there and met him and gave her his approval. And he kind of stayed there in the wings just in case, but they were all friends. He also had a rope placed around his neck. He was stabbed, and he had also been shot too. Now I kind of want to pause away from the slide here and mention that Sharon and Jay had actually taken martial arts lessons from Bruce Lee. And Jay had helped Bruce Lee hook up with someone who got him in his first big movie. And so Jay was sort of proficient at martial arts, which when you think about it, if you have Jay knowing martial arts, you have, kind of a gate at this house, and then you have two men and you have two women, and Charlie sends one man and girls. I always thought that was odd because anybody could have been there. Jay had a Anka, and forgive me for mispronouncing that if I didn't say it right. An Anka is his business icon. It means, it's a symbol, kind of a modified cross. It means living, and it also means becoming, and is often considered a cult. Sebring told others that it meant eternal life, and it is an Egyptian symbol that is also the name of a beetle. Okay, so we're making another connection there. He did give these out, little Ankas, with each hair product that he sold, and he had one that he wore around his neck, and I believe it was there when he died. He wasn't an aspiring actor, but he did appear in an episode of Batman as Mr. Oceanbring. This episode also featured a duo called Chad and Jeremy, who were Capitol Records recording artists, and they were known for such songs as Yesterday's Gone, Teenage Failure, and From a Window, which was a Lennon and McCartney song. And I picked those three because of the Yesterday connection. The Teenage Failure reminded me of Charlie Manson, and From a Window, was a Lennon and McCartney song. Now, how many other people got to do Lennon and McCartney songs?
Well, the Rolling Stones, they wrote a tune for the Stones, but off the top of my head, I'm sure there were others, but it can't be a lot.
Yeah, I didn't think it was very many. So I'm not sure what that means, but I think it means something. Jay had lived in Jean Harlow's old house where her husband had committed suicide. 3 other mysterious deaths had also happened there before Jay moved in, and one of them was in the pool. They were all really odd things. They weren't natural deaths. And one night, Sharon spent the night in this house when Jay was away and told others that she saw a ghost as well as a premonition of Jay's death. And I believe that premonition included a rope, if I'm not mistaken. The house is known for its activity, let's say that. And as far as the Tate murders, Jay's face was the only one that was covered. The others were not. And Jay created men's hair pieces. Now, in the book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, this is discussed actually, where Jay makes hairpieces. Tex Watson worked for a wig shop, and they were close to each other. You know, they weren't far away distance-wise. And it would seem that it was likely that these two people would know each other.
This just reeks of occult ritual murder. I mean, that's just my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Going back to the cover, the face was covered. I don't know. Maybe back then they knew more than I'm giving them credit for, but now we have all these forensic science. We have forensic psychology, and the covering means something. It usually does mean that they knew the person. It can mean other things, but it does mean usually a knowing. So I wanted to kind of put that out there because no one else's face was covered. The next slide, we have a picture of Jay with the Anka behind him, and that's at his shop. And then a picture of his home. And moving on to Abigail Folger. She was a coffee heiress, part of the Folger fortune. Her boyfriend was Voytek Frkeski, who was murdered at the same time. And that summer, they stayed a lot at the Cielo Drive house sitting. Roman had asked them to do that. And then he wanted them to stay on with Sharon for a few days once she returned from Europe. She'd been filming over there, and she was very pregnant and had to come back on the QE2 because she was too pregnant to fly. When she finally arrived home, they stayed on with her a couple days, just taking care of her, a little helping her out until Roman was supposed to be returning shortly. So that's why they were there. The police had an opinion that Voytek may have been involved in drug dealing because he didn't have any kind of income other than from Abigail, and his friends were all involved in drugs. We're all drug people, I guess you would say. So they had this idea that perhaps he was involved in drug dealing. I don't know that, but if it were, he could be a target just for that reason. They did meet Manson at a party at Cass Elliott's house. Now, again, I tried to find these things twice before I include them in here, the things that we really haven't heard of. But that's out there that this couple had known Manson, and that actually Abigail, who was also a very sweet and nice and generous and kind person, gave Manson some money. And then eventually she stopped the support. Now, I do not know why she gave him money, if that was just because she felt sorry for him or he conned her somehow. I don't really know. But she was also open-minded as far as the whole hippie movement went, and probably had a little soft spot. She did support a theater in Haight-Ashbury, and it just so happened that Charlie Manson had lived on the same street as this theater. So it's unclear if there was possibly a connection before the murders, before the whole Los Angeles thing that spanned back a couple of years. It's just not really clear, but it's possible.
Manson was also part of the whole Laurel Canyon scene.
Yes.
Right. So he wasn't somebody who was unknown, a loner. He was connected into a lot of people, at least from the standpoint of acquaintances. So I just put that out there for folks to kind of chew on.
Right. She also had funded money to Timothy Leary and Ken Anger. And that ties her into the whole group with the LSD and the whole satanic part. Now, I don't know why. I do not know why she gave these people money, but she did.
Well, Ken Anger was a disciple of Crowley.
Right. Voytek had a son, and he was also stabbed to death on June 6, 1999. And I don't know that you can get another date that is got more sixes or inverted sixes in it than that date. So it kind of makes you pause and wonder, who was this guy? And I did want to mention Abigail volunteered as a social worker in California. She had all the money she ever needed. She didn't even take money for it, but she would go out there and perform duties as a social worker in California, which I'm sure now you couldn't just do that. But back then things were a little different. I picked a couple of pictures here that we don't normally see for these two. It seems like there's not a lot of pictures out there. You could see that she was obviously a socialite at some point in her life before the hippie time caught up with her. And Voytek, they do seem kind of like happy people there. Moving on to Cielo. Cielo means heaven in Spanish. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I thought that was strange that nobody ever tells you that part. It was the location of the Tate murders, the night of August 8th and August 9th. Now, we all believe they did die on the 9th, but the night, part of the attacks happened over the 8th. This was late at night. So a lot of people say August 8th or August 9th, but we do believe they died on the 9th, which there's your 9. Former residents include Michelle Mayer, Baroness de Rothschild, Lillian Gish, Cary Grant with Diane Cannon, Terry Melcher with Candace Bergman, and Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. There were others and other names that people would know, but these are the most famous, more famous ones that you've heard of.
They lived on Cielo Drive, not necessarily that house.
They lived in this house.
They lived in the house.
These people rented the house at one time or another. And with the prior residents, of course, were Terry Melcher and Mark Lindsay was his roommate. And then Candace Bergman moved in towards the end of that lease. And we'll get to a little bit more about that here in just a minute.
Okay.
Mark Lindsay claimed that there was a prior stabbing death at the house. The landlord warned him and Melcher that it was haunted by a ghost who did not like beautiful women. He did not feel comfortable in the house. Now, I got that directly from his Facebook page. It had been reposted on something else and again, and I thought, well, nobody ever mentioned that there was a prior stabbing in the Cielo house. Really? That's odd, because you would think that would get out there.
So Mark Lindsay had that on his personal Facebook page?
It is on his personal Facebook page.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's to where you can go there and read that. Now, unless he's just fooling everybody and putting the story out there, but I wouldn't think so. I mean, he goes into details about something about it. The landlord, this gets into a long, the landlord warned him and Melcher that it was haunted. And something about it was a couple on their wedding night, and she found out that he had not been true to her prior to them consummating the marriage. And when she found this out, she stabbed him. And apparently she is supposed to be the ghost, and she doesn't like beautiful women. And it was to the point where Lindsay didn't even like to go out one particular door of the home. He would walk around. It was kind of a big home, even though it only had 2 bedrooms. He would walk around and use a different door because it was cold and that kind of thing. Anyway, the landlord told him this before they moved in, and then when it was all okay for the most part until Candace Bergman started showing up, and then there was a lot of arguing, everybody stopped getting along. So Terry Melcher and Candy Bergman moved somewhere else, and Lindsay moved separately from them. Although they were all still friends, they didn't move to the same place the next time. But the point is that he insinuates that this ghost was causing problems with Candace. Then, and I did not put this in here on the slides, but I wanted to say, I kind of wondered if he told them that, if the landlord told them that it was haunted before they moved in, would he not have warned Roman and Sharon that it were haunted also? You would think. However, after the murder, it seems that Sharon's dad had to go over there and clean the mess up. And this same landlord sued the Tate estate or Tate Polanski estate, whatever. He sued them for trying to get $40,000 for damages. And I think he finally got $4,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 or something like that. And they fought it out in court for a while. But that landlord ended up moving in the home and living there for many, many years, I think till it sold. in the 80s or 89 or something like that. So I don't know. I think that didn't really come out because he wanted to sue them for the damages. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He didn't want that to be the Amityville Horror house. And maybe that's why he moved in there. And he had told the first tenants there, the Melcher, that it was, it was only beautiful women that would have a problem there. So I think Sharon had the interest in the occult. Roman had done Rosemary's Baby. The landlord probably didn't think twice about it, Well, they can handle it. So moving on, the Cielo address has been changed. And I might be wrong about this. You can check it. But I believe the new address is 10066.
Why not?
Yeah. So the home was torn down some years back, and another house has been constructed in its place. Nothing is the same. Nothing is the same. Well, I say nothing is the same, but I did find out that a wall, like a supporting wall or something, was left of the original home, because in Los Angeles, if that counts as a remodel instead of a new construction. So you get to scoot around some of the regulations. So there actually is a piece of the old house left. It's much larger. It's a huge home. Beatles are rumored to have visited there at some point, but I never found a picture. I never found anything but a little bit of hearsay on that. So I do not know that. A lot of people talk about it being at a cul-de-sac. When you look at the map, it doesn't really look like a cul-de-sac. I think they're talking about how the driveway comes up and was a detached garage. It kind of looked like a cul-de-sac next to the house. And the last tenant before it was torn down was the recording artist 9 Inch Nails. Now, I'm sorry, that's not what I listen to. I don't know anything about that person or those people, but they did have a recording studio in there, and they and Marilyn Manson apparently recorded some songs, and maybe one of them was called Pigs or something. Maybe somebody else can find out a little bit more about that. Interestingly enough, supposedly the 9 Inch Nails person took the door that had pig written on it in blood, the famous picture we've all seen. He took that door to his recording studio in New Orleans.
Okay. Different strokes for different folks. The whole thing is just reeking of heaviness and darkness.
It is heavy and dark, and maybe if there's any kiddos around, they shouldn't be watching, because it's going to get a little bit worse here, unfortunately. Okay, so we have a picture of the Cielo Drive house back in the day. I do not know if this was in the 60s or 50s or 70s, probably 70s, but it gives you a good idea of what it looked like at the time. That's a French-inspired country style for anybody that's into that. Waverly is the street that the Labiancas lived on. The people who were murdered the next night, the couple who was murdered the next night. And the wife's name was Rosemary Labianca, so there we see Rosemary again. The words to several Beatles songs were scrawled throughout the murder scene in blood. The residents had several break-ins in the summer of 1969, and the Labiancas wanted to move. Now, Charlie and his friends, Charlie actually had a friend that lived next door, and I believe the friend's name was True. And that summer, Charlie and the family had this thing they did called creepy crawling, where they would break into a home and they would move things around, or they would, like in this case, they would take the Labianca's dogs. We're assuming it was them. The dogs would be put outside when they were inside, or they were outside and they were brought inside, and they would move things around, and they might take, something, money or something like that, but usually they were just trying to freak people's minds out. They bragged about doing creepy crawlies, but Rosemary had actually written her daughter and told her she was very concerned because she felt like they had been broken into and wanted to move. So they were working on getting that all together whenever this happened. Before they lived there, actually this was Leon's childhood home, but they had moved away from it and come back to it for whatever reason. Before they lived there, they lived over in Los Feliz in a home that Walt Disney had previously owned. which I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but you have the Walt Disney, you have the Wizards of Waverly Place. This happened on Waverly. So you have the Disney connection. The Wizards of Waverly Place debuted on October 12th, 2007. And as we know, October 12th is Crowley's birthday. If nothing else, even if you can't connect Waverly and the street Waverly that way, that is kind of weird. It is kind of a creepy fact to know that a Disney show named Waverly launched on October 12th.
Now, were the Labiancas, were they connected to Sharon Tate or Roman Polanski in any way?
Not that we know. Now, Rosemary did have some dress shops and things, but so it's possible, but not that we know.
Okay.
Not that I found. So it is possible, but they weren't the hippie. They weren't on the hippie scene. You know, they didn't know a lot of famous people, I don't think, or at least hang out with them. They were just regular people who happened to live next door to one of Charlie's friends. You know, I'm not really, I would say that if you really wanted to know why did they choose them, the Labiancas, I think it's because they had done this creepy crawly thing. They knew the house, they knew the layout, they knew that sometimes they were home and sometimes they were out of town. They knew they were older, probably. They knew the kids didn't live there anymore. And this address has also been changed. Oh, and by the way, I did learn yesterday it's on the market. If anybody has $1.98 million, you can buy the house that this happened in. And there is a picture of it. Now it's also been added on to and looks a little bit different now, but it is a nice place. Leon and Rosemary, he was a grocery executive and she had some fashion stores and a mobile fashion store where it was like like we have food trucks now. She had something similar with fashion back then, and they were considered successful. She had done well as a stock market investor, but he was a gambler. So there were some money issues there at the end, and they weren't really sure in the beginning if that had something to do with this or not. Now, I did not put death scene photos on here, police crime photos. I just thought that would not be tasteful. But if anybody, has the stomach for it, when you look at the W that was carved into his chest, it kind of extends down and looks like these two X's in the occult symbolism. They left a fork and they stabbed him with a fork also. It was very brutal. It was a horrible scene. Both faces were covered, and Rosemary is traditionally carried by mourners at funerals. I thought it kind of fits in, but Charlie had actually been at this murder scene the night before and went inside and helped to tie them up. And then he left while the murders were committed. Tex Watson is, pointed at saying that he actually did most of the killing there.
So the source of information, it says that Charlie was there the night before to tie them up. Where did that come from?
That's known. I mean, that's out there. It's in Helter Skelter. It's in, he was there. He was at the scene.
Okay.
He actively went in and had conversations with these people. He let Rosemary put more clothes on than she had. And then he went outside and then the murders happened. Once again, Charlie says he didn't commit the murders, but he wasn't really there. But yeah, he kind of was. He knew what was going on. And Charlie was the leader of the family. I didn't go really deep into this, explaining every little nuance, because I think most people that watch this channel kind of have a general knowledge of who Charlie Manson was and the family. Most of us are probably a little bit older people and understand that. It is rumored that he met Melcher and McCartney at a party or at different parties in June of 1968. Now, I don't know that. That's just out there. It's one of those things that was said. I don't know that, but I don't doubt that. Again, it was one big circle of friends.
Right.
He hung around with Dennis Wilson, actually moved in with Dennis Wilson. I think Dennis had picked up one of the girls who was hitchhiking and took her home. And then the next thing he knows, Charlie shows up with the rest of all of them, and they live there, and they ran up $100,000 bill of groceries and doctor visits, treating their ailments. And different things. So the record company got a little sore with Dennis over that, and he moved off somewhere else to get away from them. The Beach Boys did record a song that was one of Charlie's songs. It's called Learn Not to Live, or also known as Cease to Exist, in November of 1967. It was a B-side of a record. Charlie had previously lived in Haight-Ashbury, and he probably was not a member of the Process Church, but he does appear to have been familiar with the Process Church and utilized similar characteristics and mind control methods. Now, anybody who knows Charlie Manson understands that, it's all about the mind control, and he had to learn that somewhere. We're not sure if it was the Process Church or prison or wherever, but he did somehow, somewhere learn mind control methods. And he believed that Revelation 9 in the Bible was all about the Beatles. When I was preparing for the show, I realized that I knew somebody who had actually met Charlie Manson, who had worked in one of these prisons that he was in, in the 90s or 2000s or something, and had met Charlie Manson. So I had to talk to them about it and just say, what was he like? What was Charlie really like? And his response was that he got a lot of mail from people of all ages, like more mail than anybody else. And he made these paper spiders that were creepy. Have you ever seen the spiders?
No.
Well, they're like Japanese folding paper or something, and then he used his hair in them. So they are these creepy looking things.
Yeah, that would be creepy. And the other thing, Victoria, is Revelation 9 has an uncanny resemblance to Revolution 9.
Yes, that's true. The four horsemen, well, you just kind of have to know Revelation, but Charlie was obsessed with the Beatles.
Yep.
He was obsessed with them. My friend also said that one time there was a real spider and he stepped on it and killed it. And Charlie got onto him and said that could have been a god or something. I thought that was pretty funny. And he said Charlie would try to play mind games with everyone, and he didn't like anyone who wouldn't play. When he lived with the girls and the family, they had one apartment that was painted yellow, and they all called it the Yellow Submarine. And when they were on this bus trip that they took together, they, called it the Magical Mystery Tour or something. He was completely obsessed with the White Album, and he was the only one that could decipher it for them. He was the only one that could tell them what it meant, the family.
Also, I want to mention to the audience, Victoria, that in the revised version of Memoirs, the 9 after 909 version, the blue-covered book, Billy spends some time in the book distancing himself from Charlie Manson. I just want to point that out, too.
Yeah, that's true. I don't want to say this the wrong way, but I want people to understand, if you want to understand a cult, if you want to recognize occult things, sometimes you have to have at least a baseline knowledge of Christianity. And this is an example with Revelation 9, because that's how it all works. You're taking something and you're twisting it around. They take crosses and they turn them upside down. So if you understand one, it's easier to understand the other, or easier to recognize the other. Maybe I should put it that way, because I don't think anybody here wants to necessarily study occult things and become an occultist. I think that they want to recognize it in their own lives, so maybe they can distance themselves from it when need be. So I do want to say that I don't think a lot of people understand that. You have to have a baseline on Christianity to understand anything occult. Picture of Charlie and one of the girls, Susan Atkins, and Charlie has the nice X on his forehead, which is a witch's cross, or that's what some people say it is. Susan met up with Charlie in Haight-Ashbury. She was a member of the family, and she was also known as Sadie. Some believe that the Beatles song Sexy Sadie is about her. In Haight-Ashbury, she worked for Anton LaVey in a topless show, and her stage name was Sharon King. She'd been arrested on unrelated charges to the murder and then bragged in jail about the murders, and the police were informed. And she had admitted in an interview that she had planned to cut the baby out of Sharon Tate, but did not because they ran out of time. I did not know that. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. And obviously she wasn't of sound mind. She's very unhealthy.
Well, this was an interview. I actually watched it. It's out there online if you search around interviews. But she also was one that said different things, different times. But she did say that. She did say that she had planned to cut the baby out of Sharon Tate. So speaking of dismembered babies, that brings us to the Beatles and their Yesterday and Today butcher cover, which was replaced with the trunk photo here. Now, I want to pause on this. I've always had a problem with the way Paul looked in this picture. I never believed that was Paul. And then Billy said in the book, he said, Paul was always on the album cover, so it was always Paul. And I was like, nuh-uh, this person here does not look anything like Paul McCartney. I thought it was Tara Brown. But I went all the way back in and found the photos from the photo shoot that day with this trunk photo. And this one is reversed. And I think that is why he looks different. It's a mirrored image or reversed image.
Okay, I didn't know that. So that's a mirrored image.
Yes, this one is. The original was flipped the other way. And I think that's why he looks a little different there. Maybe his hair is tossed over to the different side. Maybe one side of his face looks a little bit different than the other. I don't know, but he just didn't look like himself. Moving on to the Beatles, the White Album was released 11/22/1968. And 11/22 was what?
JFK's assassination, the anniversary.
That's right. The songs that were concerned with the murders were from the White Album, which Charlie was obsessed with. They were mostly written in India. The Yesterday and Today album originally featured dismembered babies, but was recalled. The second cover featured Paul inside a light blue steamer trunk. John met Yoko at the Indigo Gallery. I've mentioned that. And that was a place frequented by Sharon and Roman. And is it on the White Album, Blue Jay Way?
No, Blue Jay Way was on Magical Mystery Tour.
Magical Mystery Tour, okay. And that is a street in Laurel Canyon. And it's not far from the murder locations. We've already talked about Global Beatles Day, so I'm going to skip that. Ringo rented a home from Cass Elliot, and it was directly across the street from the home of Abigail Folger. Now, I do not know the timeline on Ringo renting that. I have some pictures of Ringo in front of the home, but I do not know if he moved there before, during, or after the murders. I do not know when he lived there, but he did rent from Cass Elliot. Lennon reports in a 1974 Rolling Stone interview that he dropped acid at like Doris Day's house or something, which Terry Melcher was Doris Day's son, and Melcher was a prior resident of Cielo Drive. So a lot of people think that the statement is saying that Lennon was at the Cielo Drive house. Maybe, maybe not. Melcher lived other places at some time, but a lot of people think this is Lennon saying, yeah, I was there. I've been at that house.
Well, the other thing I want to mention, Victoria, is John met Yoko on November 9th, 1966. So we have the 9/11 date. This time it's reversed, right? It's 11/9. So again, we have the 9/11, 11/9 dates in play here. So I just want to call that out because the rest of the dates that you have on this chart are all occulted.
Yeah.
11/22 is the anniversary of JFK, but 11 plus 22 is 33.
Right.
6/25 is Anti-Christmas Day. Lennon reports in a 1974 Rolling Stone interview, 7 and plus 4 is 11. And then we have John meeting Yoko on November 9th, which again is 11/9 or 9/11. So I just want to call that out because we do have people who watch this and listen to this, and they just can't get their heads wrapped around the numbers. They don't think the numbers mean anything, but in reality, the numbers mean everything.
I used to wonder if people who talked like that about adding numbers and subtracting numbers and reducing numbers just didn't sit and go through the numbers until something worked. I mean, I have to be honest. When I was a skeptic at some point in my life, and I didn't even want to hear it. It was like, oh, well, you can add up those numbers and leave a number out or whatever, and you can get whatever number you want. Maybe once you can, maybe twice you can, but I'm going to give you some date lists here in a couple slides where we go through dates and you're seeing these numbers over and over and over again. And it's just not a coincidence.
So I just don't put numbers out there and dates and try to make something of them. When I do the work, and it sounds like you're doing the same thing, is I'm looking for patterns.
Right.
Are these numbers occurring over and over and over again?
Right. There was a report of Lennon at a party in 1973, and he threw a chair through a window and went crazy and was yelling, "It's all Roman Polanski's fault." No one knew any more than that, but that's been reported several times, several different places. It's all Roman Polanski's fault. So I do not know what that meant, but I went ahead and mentioned it because it does tie the two together. And that's what we're supposed to be talking about as connections. In the 1980 Playboy interview, Lennon said, "It has nothing to do with me. Manson was just an extreme version of the people who came up with the Paul is dead thing." Okay.
They came up with it. When I say they, right, the Beatles put out the Paul is dead rumors.
It's an extreme version of the people who came up with the Paul is dead thing. Charles Manson interpreted that Helter Skelter was something to do with the four horsemen of the apocalypse. McCartney said in a 2000 book, The Beatles Anthology, "I still don't know what all that stuff is. It's from the Bible, Revelations. I haven't read it, so I wouldn't know." But he interpreted the whole thing and arrived at having to go out and kill everyone. It was frightening because you don't write songs for those reasons. Now, I did not have time to look this up, but in Bio Paul's education when he was young, wasn't some of that at a Catholic school or a church school of some sort?
Yes. And it's also not very believable knowing how much Billy is into the esoteric and mysticism and an acolyte of Crowley, that he would have no knowledge of the Bible. That just does not ring true to me at all.
But a person who wanted to encourage someone else not to read it might make such a statement. I don't know.
Now, I could believe him that he didn't write the songs for the purposes of motivating Charles Manson. I can believe that part.
Right.
But for him to say that, he doesn't know anything about the Bible or he didn't read it, I don't believe that.
That's what I agree there, that he fully knows what Revelation says and is about. I was a little surprised that he made the statement that he hadn't read it.
Well, we know he has, because in Memoirs, he takes us to that picture that John drew of the four of them with the horse.
Right. So he had to.
He had to. So that statement right there is what he put out into the public, for public consumption is not true.
Lennon's killer was Mark David Chapman, and the Cielo maid also had the last name of Chapman. I'm positive they were not related, but that was just one of those like Kennedy Lincoln things I threw in here. And George Harrison was attacked and stabbed with a knife by a 33-year-old man from Liverpool on 12/30/1999. And
I think it was at 3:30 a.m. in the morning.
I just for a moment tried to look into that person a little bit who did that. And Richard has also, can't find much about him.
The person that stabbed George Harrison.
He's already out of jail and moved on with life. And, he went to a mental institution for a while and then was pronounced fine. And I don't know, that something doesn't smell right about all that. Okay, we've already talked about the White Album release and that date. Rosemary's baby birthday, we've talked about that. I just put a list of dates in here.
About the White Album, too, I should mention that Billy tells us that he was intending for the White Album to have 33 songs, and he wound up with 30. So he was 3 short, but his goal initially was to have 33 songs on the White Album, just like on the past masters that were released by Apple. If you add all of the songs up, there are 33 of them. Okay, I just want to put that out there, again, for all those people who think the numbers don't mean anything. They may not mean anything to you, but for the people who are involved in the occult and in the esoteric, it means a whole lot.
And again, I think it does help you a little bit in life if you can spot that. Other dates, I'll run through these quickly. You can go back and study these at some time if you like. Sharon and Jay and Abigail were all buried on August 13th, 1969, which there's your 13. Rakowski's son was stabbed on June 6, 1999. The Batman episode featuring Sebring aired 12/6/1966 and re-aired June 6, 2002. There you have the 18. 12 plus 6 is 18. 1966 re-aired 6/6. There's your 66. Cielo murders were on the night of 8/8 and early morning of 8/9. Abbey Road photo shoot was the same day, 8/8/1969. Disney's Haunted Mansion opened 8/8/1969. And I believe in some of the commentary about that was that there used to be a sign up that said, we're out gathering 100 souls. When we get 100 souls, we'll open up the mansion. And it, without any warning, it opened up on 8/8/1969. The Nagasaki bomb was dropped on August 9th. Nixon announced on August 8th that he would resign and left on August 9th. Lennon's Dick Cavett appearance was 9/11/1971. Lennon's date of death was 12/8. Jim Morrison's birthday was also 12/8. And that you almost have to read the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon to kind of get all those connections, but it's interesting.
Well, Lennon's date of death is 9/11. It is actually 9/11 in verse. So it's 12, which is 3, plus the 8 is 11, and then 1980 is 1 plus 9 plus 8. In numerology, 9's equals 0, so 1 plus 8 is 9. So it's 11/9 or 9/11. So again, another little interesting tidbit for those out there that are into numbers.
I'm going to skip on to the next slide now because we've covered a couple of the others. Lennon was born 10/9. Sean, his son, was born on 10/9. There's some 9s. Epstein first watched the Beatles perform on 11/9. The Beatles' first record contract with EMI was 6/18/1962, which reduces to 6/9/9. Now, Richard and I went back and forth a little bit on that contract thing. There was the date that they went, the date that it was agreed upon, the verbal date, and then there was an execution date. So you have the date they agreed upon, and I believe was 6/6. And that may have been when the ritual happened. Not sure, just guessing on that, but 6/6 is when it all came together. For whatever reason, EMI says that that date is 6/18. There may have been a signature or two that happened after that. Usually you consider execution date the date of the last signature, but that's the date they put out there. John met Yoko on 11/9. Susan Atkins' death date, 9/24/2009, and that reduces down to 9/6/11. Abigail Folger, birth and death date, 8/11 to 8/9, so you have 11 and a 9. Sharon Tate is 1/24/1943 to August 9th, so you have a 6 and a 9 there. Jay Sebring reduces down to 11 and a 9. The Ram album began recording 10/12/1970, which we know is Aleister Crowley's birthday. And Mia Farrow, born 2/9/1945. There's an 11 there, or a 9, whichever way you want to look at it. I went back to this 6/25 date. It just kept seeming significant, and that was the date in 1967 when the Beatles had the sing-along All You Need Is Love on Our World broadcast. That just reeks of the whole New World Order.
Yep.
In 1964, a New York radio station played A Hard Day's Night 10 days prior to the release. So they went ahead after that and released it. And that wasn't an accident. Paperback Writer became a #1 hit in 1966 on that date. The Final Mix of Revolution 9 in 1968. This, I put in here accidentally, but I do think it kind of applies. In 1985, Mark Lindsay was to play Lennon on a TV movie on this date. He was released when it was found that his real name was the same as the assassin. Now, Mark Lindsay here is not the same Mark Lindsay as Paul Revere and the Raiders. This is an English actor. This is an English actor who used to be named Mark Chapman, who became Mark Lindsay. So those are different people, but it still kind of plays into everything here. Probably my favorite slide out of this whole terrible story is this one. I was looking at the crime scene photos and noticed these trunks. And because I'd had kind of a fascination with Paul not being Paul in this trunk over here, I remembered that they look an awful lot alike. And I thought, well, is it me, or were these common back then and I just don't know that? So I kind of Googled around. No, there's all kinds of steamer trunks, all kinds of colors, all kinds of sizes, all kinds of different kinds. But for whatever reason, Sharon got these 2 steamer trunks the day of her death on August 8th, technically the day before she died. They were full of clothes, and Roman had sent them from Europe. She had asked him to send her clothes back over. So nothing necessarily nefarious inside of them. You do see some blood on them from the murder there, but they do look an awful lot like Paul here in this trunk. There is, Richard says there is a story, and forgive me, I'm butchering this completely, but it has to do with Egypt and someone who stepped inside a trunk and they got nailed in and sent down the river. So it is kind of a symbol of death, or considered that way in occult studies. Next slide is Sharon Tate, and this is the movie where supposedly they modeled Malibu Barbie off of Sharon Tate. It's from the Don't Make Waves movie. Of the 7 victims, 3 had their faces covered. This can mean an emotional attachment or being known to the murderer. Some think it means regret. Occult-related crime scenes often have the following things present, and this isn't a comprehensive list. I just went through the list and kind of picked out what applied from 2 different police published handbooks where they talk about, if you find these things, it may be an occult crime scene. Ropes on or near the body, stab wounds in patterns, stabbing in a fashion to drain the body of blood, which that's what happened to Tate. She bled out. There was one particular gash that was particularly bad, and so they intended, I think that they intended to for her to die that way. Signs that the victim had been tied or suspended, such as rope burns, biblical verses or graffiti written in blood. Now, going back to one of our other slides, you have to remember that the Bible and the Beatles in Charlie's mind were kind of the same thing. Okay? The Beatles were God to him, so some of their words rose up to biblical meaning in his mind.
Well, in John's song, I Found Out, he says, I've seen religions from Jesus to Paul, and I've covered this where Paul, biological Paul, is a graven Christ image who died and was resurrected via Billy. So,
right.
There's definitely Christian Christ-like overtones to the whole thing with the Beatles and Paul McCartney. And again, some people have a difficult time with this, but at least for me, it's very clear that this is what's going on.
Crimes that on significant occult dates or associated with those dates. So that goes back to the whole dates. And Manson told Tex to do something witchy before they left the ranch on August 8th. So I have to say, I don't know that Charlie could belong very well to a group, but I think he kind of had his own occult thing going on, his own religion, his own witchcraft that he melted together from other things. I don't know about that, but he told him to do something witchy. So he wanted it left. He wanted it to appear as if it were a cult. But I think one of those handbooks I read said if they write on the wall, graffiti on the wall in blood like that, that some of this is not really an occult killing. If they do some of these things, it is people who want it to look like an occult killing, or want it to be a cult, but they're not really witches. Does that make sense? This isn't really a sacrifice. They just want it to look that way. Manson told the district attorney that subliminal messages were inside the Beatles' music. His followers thought that only Charlie could translate these meanings. I guess we know that. Subliminal messages. The recent PID movement had popularized song interpretation. So what that's saying is that a lot of times in years before, people didn't really think about what the words to the music said, but they were breaking them down because of the PID movement and really trying to figure out what the songs meant, where they hadn't really done that before. The words that were found in blood on the walls at the crime scenes were pigs, helter skelter, and rise. These words were from the Beatles' White Album songs, Helter Skelter, Piggies, Blackbird, Revolution 1, and Revolution 9, and were also thought to play a significant part in Manson's reasoning that a revolution would soon happen. And I want to say that Bill has started playing Helter Skelter again. Did you see that at the concert?
He played with Ringo.
Yes.
A recent video showed he did Helter Skelter and was it Sgt. Pepper? With Ringo joined him on stage. So yeah, he's playing Helter Skelter. He has been actually for the last several years. He's pulled the song out and played it.
Okay. I think he thought it was a good song and, wanted to revive that. Maybe had hoped this was far enough in the past that it wouldn't matter. But I don't know. I mean, this doesn't die. This whole Tate murder thing, it doesn't go away. People don't forget it. That song's always going to be associated with it. And I don't feel too sorry about it because they put so much stuff in their songs. It's a wonder more things didn't happen than this. On a door, now I have read this different ways, okay? This is the best I could come up with on this because I have read it different ways. I've read different reports, but I've tried to, if I'm wrong on this, forgive me. But at Spawn Ranch, there was graffiti found on a door in late August or early September with the words to Song You Never Give Me Your Money that wasn't released until October 1st in the U.S. So what I'm saying is that supposedly during one of these police raids in late August or early September, the words were written to a Beatles song on a door that wasn't released yet in the U.S. So in other words, they didn't have any way to know those words to that song, but yet they're on a door in Charlie's ranch. So that either means Charlie had the words and shared them with them, or they had the words and they shared them with Charlie before the release.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen it both ways that maybe these dates are wrong or whatever, but I looked closely at it and it does seem to be that they had the words to this song on a door before it was released in America. Next slide, I've showed a picture of what a helter skelter is. I always wondered what that was. It's a slide, and there's one in the Yesterday movie at the end, a helter skelter slide. They're in England, and then a picture of the door and the timeline. I didn't really understand why Paul is Dead wasn't bigger than it was. It seemed like that just, I sit and study it. Why didn't other people think this was interesting? And then I started looking at the different events of 1969. And so we'll start back on this timeline for the room's sake. I only included certain dates, but I have a list of other things that we can add here later. August 8th to 10th, the Manson murders. August 8th, Abbey Road cover shoot. August 16th, Spawn Ranch raided. Woodstock was also going on at that time. September 69, Lennon was talking to others about how he was going to quit the Beatles. The PID rumors finally started surfacing around college campuses. Abbey Road was released. The first PID article was published at Drake University. So that's September 69. October, the Baker Ranch was raided. October, there was a Detroit and New York City radio show about Paul is Dead, and Labor's article came out. November, we have Susan Atkins talking in jail. So the Manson murder, the Manson trial, not the trial, but the Manson arrest started ramping back up at that time in November 1969, which is also when Life magazine publishes the Paul is Still With Us article. And April 1970, the Beatles break up. July 1970, Manson trial begins. Now, on top of that, if you go over here backwards, there was the moon landing in 1969, Chappaquiddick, Hurricane Camille, Woodstock, Brian Jones' death, Vietnam, the Zodiac killings, and the Ultimate incident, which all surrounded this PID release. And so if you were going to tell someone something and you release it at a time when everything else is going on in the world, nobody's going to know. This isn't going to make like much of the evening news or anything. So I really felt like, yeah, they released it and they told people, but they knew that it wasn't ever going to get any traction because there was too much else going on in the world at that moment.
Well, plus, as far as a lot of people were concerned, Paul McCartney wasn't dead. So it was something that was not taken seriously by the vast majority of the population, So they would just set it aside. And like you said, Victoria, there's so much other stuff going on that actually hit the news.
Right. There was all kinds of huge stories, though. And that's really what I think is that this never really got traction beyond maybe some college campuses because there was so much going on. I mean, people watched the news every night to see if their son was alive or dead or
Right.
what was going on or if they were going to get drafted. And there was news maybe in the morning, but there was news at noon and there was news at night or at 6 and 11. There was only news a couple times a day on TV back then. And it was only 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, pretty much it was 6 and 11. News at 6, news at 11. And I remember the Vietnam body counts. I remember my father watching the news, and I was a young kid at the time, but I remember them reading off the numbers, how many troops had died in Vietnam. And like you said, I mean, it was just so many other things that people were concerned about and focused on that Paul is dead just wasn't taken seriously.
So I had hoped to wrap things back around and tie some of the Manson things more up to Rosemary's Baby at the end, but it didn't happen. It turned right back around and showed me Paul is dead, which was not my intent in the first place. This was supposed to be a little bit separate of it, but it did. It just showed me, I finally understand why that wasn't bigger back then, because it just got buried under so much other stuff. I have one more PID slide here. It's a cartoon, 1965 Beatles cartoon. It was the debut in, I think it was called A Hard Day's Night. But I kind of snipped a clip off of it here where it has R.I.P. MAC. Rest in peace, Paul McCartney's nickname, Mac, one of his nicknames. And this would have been a whole year before he died, at least. And then a Batman comic I found, which you can search around online and find this, but it's a PID comic. It's a PID comic book, and they find out that all of the other Beatles are doubles, but Paul is the real one, I believe is how it goes. So that was kind of interesting.
And Robin's holding a version or a knockoff of the Sgt. Pepper album, because when you flip it around, right, Billy is turned, his back is facing us. So they're actually telling us on the front cover of that comic to look at Sgt. Pepper for the clues.
Right. And there's a yellow submarine back there, or yellow something.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'd like to look at that closer. I just haven't had the time, but maybe somebody else can take the.
No, I completely understand about time.
Yeah. I really had hoped to look at this and find out. I really wanted to know with the Tate murders, who was the target. And I do lean a little bit towards Sharon and Jay because they had the rope. They had the rope around them. But, or maybe just Sharon because she had the baby and maybe they wanted the baby. Not really sure. But, any of them could have been targets. They could have been mad at Abigail for not keeping up on her donations, or they could have been mad at Voytek for the, drug dealing, or I don't know. I really don't know. But I think that the next night, the Labiancas was just an extension of the first night. They killed and they just wanted to make a bigger scene. It's a very sad thing. These were people that were, I know maybe they were partiers or whatever, but they were really quality people. They contributed to society in a positive way generally. And this was a shame that it had to happen to them.
Yeah. The interesting thing with your presentation is, as we see many times with this, Victoria, is there is a connection between people, maybe it's not direct, perhaps it's indirect, but, people are connected to people who are connected to people. And it just seems to be a very small world when we talk about the music and entertainment industry.
Yes, almost like a high school that they all went to and all know each other. but nobody else beyond those walls gets to know much about them, really.
Exactly. It's like a kludge or a club. And, I believe that, they are in it to varying degrees. Some are really like up to their eyeballs in what goes on with the occult and the rituals and all that stuff. And others are not. Others, they just happen to be, collateral damage, if you will, to a bigger picture that's run by people who are much deeper into this.
Right.
So that's why it's very important to be careful of the people you hang around with, the company you keep, right?
And I think ultimately that was their downfall, was unfortunately the company they kept. Even though they were nice people, they hit the party scene, and that's what happened. Not to the Labiancas, though. They didn't have anything to do with that.
I almost wonder if the thought crossed my mind that if it wasn't an occult ritual killing, my sense is that it was, that they needed a certain body count.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing that up. Going back to the slide towards the beginning here of the Tate Labiancas, you'll count 7 people. Then there was Gary Hinman, number 8, who was murdered before the Tate LaBianca murders. But that just, people know that, but it's not really advertised out there as part of it. Maybe with this new movie coming out, we'll see more. And then Shorty Shea, who was number 9. There's 9. And then 10 if you count Sharon's baby. But that certain body count. And what I also wondered, one of the things that I had, occurred to me was maybe Charlie wasn't really in the club and he wanted to be in the club and they wouldn't let him in the club. So he says, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to show you that I can do everything that the people in the club do.
It could be. I talked to Neil Sanders. I did a show with Neil Sanders because Neil wrote a whole book on Charlie. Neil's conclusion was that Charlie was really a low-level criminal. And, he was taking care of business at a much lower level. But it's possible that with that type of role, that if he were given certain marching orders, in other words, to set the scene up as an example, he would go out and do that, But again, too, you brought up the fact that he is also a classic mind control subject. I don't know. It seems to me like he was another one of these pieces on the chessboard that are leveraged and utilized to do the dirty work, because the people that are actually pulling the strings do not get their hands dirty.
One point I think I forgot to read in here, I think it's on the slide, but I didn't read it, was that Manson had been to Cielo Drive on at least 2 occasions. One of them was when Mark Lindsay lived there, and he talks about that on his Facebook page, that he went in, he came home, and there was a meeting between Melcher and some other record executives. And Charlie was sitting on the floor in front of the refrigerator, and he said, hey, man, I need to get a drink out of here. Can I get in here? And he just sat there and looked right weird like Charlie does, and wouldn't move. And so he asked him a couple more times, and he still wouldn't move. So he went out in the living room, and he didn't want to disturb the people, but he said, hey, there's some strange person in the kitchen blocking the refrigerator. And they're like, oh, that's just Charlie. Ignore him. And so Lindsay is admitting that Charlie knew the house. He knew the floor plan to some extent and had been there. And then a second time, and this is more of a rumor, but I think it's out there and people, believe it, that he had come to the house, and there's different stories. He was looking for Melcher or whatever, but I don't know why he came to the house. Because supposedly he really did know that Melcher had moved. But he came to the house, and they were doing a photo shoot of Sharon Tate. And, I wonder if he just didn't make her a target, or maybe he was got the assignment and was checking it out, to see who was there, what was there, and that kind of thing. But I don't know. I've always struggled with the fact that anybody would trust Charles Manson to do a job, and do it right. But when you see interviews of him, he obviously, when he's asked detailed questions, would not say anything that would incriminate himself. So he is smart.
We'll never know, really. We'll never know. As we go into this and we dig into this stuff, and I know you've probably found the same thing that I have found, the rabbit hole just never seems to end.
Right.
You go off, you look at something, and you think, okay, well, this will be the bottom of the rabbit hole, and you're wrong, or I'm wrong. There's always more to it. It's really unbelievable how much there is to all of this. And I'm not just talking about the whole Paul is dead thing. I mean, you go into any conspiracy and you start digging into it. It's absolutely amazing where the road will take you.
It is. And I don't know, some of the others just don't seem as interesting as all this, but the Beatles just went hand in hand with Manson, and Manson, was connected by these murders, and it's all connected. Rosemary's Baby is a satanic thing. I wanted to do something to kind of bring a little bit of that out, even though it is the anniversary. I'm sure there'll be a lot on the news, but it just seems to be the same old thing. It seems to be morphing as the years go by into something else that it started years ago. And I don't know why that is, but we see that with the PID. It started one way and it's morphed over here into some other story. So I don't know. I hope we have more answers one day, but I think you're right. Maybe we won't.
Yeah, every time I say I'm trying to step back from it, something pops up, keeping me connected to it. At some point I would like to, step back from it. But I also said that when important pieces of the puzzle come forth, that I feel compelled to step forward and to look at it, research it, and then put it out there. So who knows? I don't know.
Well, I get all the way to the bottom of the Bill thing, and I'm convinced that, there was Bio Paul, and then there was William, and then I finally signed on with Street Paul. And then there's some days I don't know. Yeah, I can't imagine that there could be more than one identical lookalike for a person in the world. I mean, I just can't imagine, but their legs are the same. They're all these, they look just alike. And so Bio Paul had exact lookalikes, and then there's, William, and he has an exact lookalike. How many people in the world could look that much alike?
Well, I'll tell you a story, and we'll wrap up with this. I had a person contact me who said that they were approached on 2 separate occasions in 2 different cities by strangers. And they said to this person, hey, you'd make a lot of money as a Paul McCartney double or lookalike. All you need to do is a little bit of plastic surgery, and you can make yourself a couple of bucks. So this person contacted me, and he sent me a picture of himself. And I'm looking at the picture, and I thought, well, I'll tell you what. He has the attributes. Facial structure, he has the general look of an older Billy. And I thought, well, with a little bit of surgery, if he had agreed to it, they could pull it off. Eventually, I sat down. I did meet with this person. And we spoke at lunch, and we must have talked for about 2 hours or so. Great guy. And he relayed the story to me. He said to me, Mike, I was in 2 different cities, and 2 different people, total strangers. I didn't know who they were, said the exact same thing to me. So he says, what do you think of that? I said, well, that seems very odd. I guess we could say it's possible it's a coincidence, but it's also possible that they noticed that you have a very strong resemblance to an older looking Billy, and that there were possibilities. And so what they did was they threw it out there to see if you'd show any interest, if you'd take the bait, and you didn't, so they walked away. But if you had, perhaps they would have pursued it. So that gave me some insight into possibly how that kind of goes. They could just pull people in, and then it becomes a process of confidentiality agreements and non-disclosures. Lots of money, money talks, and there you go. So I don't know. It's unbelievable. This whole world, Victoria, that you and I and others are looking into is just so strange.
Well, they do have facial recognition now. That might not have been such an accident.
Yeah, I don't know. It's been rumored that Facebook, as an example, uses facial recognition technology, right? It's kind of something that they're talking about doing it in the future. But, when you're in this whole conspiracy research business, that whenever they say they're thinking of doing something, they're already doing it. So who knows? I have no idea, but I'll put that out there for the listeners to think about, the whole story about how they possibly can go about bringing people into the fold to be doubles and lookalikes. There's a story, and I met this person, and he's credible. I had no reason to disbelieve him. So I'll put it out. Well, Victoria, this was a fantastic presentation. It really was. And I'm really glad that we're getting the opportunity to have some of the folks that have contributed to the material that I have put out. And I have been saying that, a lot of this stuff I do research on my own, but not all of it. I get a lot of information from folks like yourself and from Richard and from others, and who do really good research and are really smart people and are really good at connecting dots. You deserve to have your moment to step out so that people can see some good work, some really good work, and the voice behind the material. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and thank you, Richard, for helping me out on some of these, especially more occult items. Thank you.
And that concludes another Sage or Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the description box below. And as always, I would like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can find all my social media and web links by visiting my hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to check out my music and album releases. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone with the next show. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
As soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all, till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. They hurt you at home and they hit you at school. They hate you if you're clever and they despise a fool. Till you're so fucking crazy you can't follow their rules. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. When they've tortured and scared you for 20 odd years, then they expect you to pick a career. When you can't really function, you're so full of fear. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. Keep your dope with religion, sex, TV. And you think you're so clever and classless and free, but you're still fucking peasant as far as I can see. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. There's room at the top, they are telling you still. But first you must learn how to smile as you kill. If you want to be like the folks on the hill. A you want